Hey folks, it's Jared Mananen from the website TahoeTrailGuide.com. Today I'm going to go over changing out the tips of your hiking or trekking poles. For me, as I film this video, it's the end of October, and the fall is usually the time I take a long, hard look at the state of my hiking poles from using them all during summer. And I noticed actually on my last hiking trip up to Friel Peak that the tip on one of the hiking poles was really worn down. So if you've ever looked at a set of brand new hiking pole tips, I always thought they were just like an angled point, but that's not the case. They become an angled point or a rounded point over use, and that's when they become the least useful. So what I find is that as the carbide tip wears down, it gets less purchase on rock. A new tip won't slide down, but when it gets worn down, it just ends up being kind of a safety hazard because you're starting to put pressure on this pole to stabilize yourself going downhill, and then it sometimes will skid out when it's worn down. Replacement hiking pole tips usually come in packs of 2 for obvious reasons. You're usually using both hiking poles. Somewhere along the lines of the life of these hiking poles, I ended up swapping out one tip at a time, so I'm not actually going to change both of them, and that's not a requirement. You don't have to do both. So this other one is just fine. We're going to leave that on there, and I will change this one out because the carbide tip on it has impacted into the plastic, so through pressure it's just kind of sunk into the plastic, and it's rounded. A lot of off-brand and inexpensive poles won't necessarily have replacement tips that you can buy for them. If that's the reason you can't use the whole pole because your tip is all rounded out and it won't, work on a durable surface anymore, it's kind of frustrating, right? And it seems like a waste of money and resources to manufacture something that you can't maintain. Another thing that I want to point out about hiking poles, and the same goes for cross-country ski poles, for example, is that the taper of the bottom shaft of the hiking pole is going to be different for every brand. So I have Leakey hiking poles, Leakey replacement hiking pole tips, and that's the only way to go. You'll find that with that different taper, you can fit that tip onto the pole, but it doesn't seat real well, and there might be some play, or this new tip that you put on barely sits on the ski pole tip. It's designed a certain way, so don't swap or interchange brands of tips. I worked at a backpacking store for a number of years that did a lot of support work for Pacific Crest Trail hikers and Tahoe Rim Trail hikers. We would get a lot of hikers in general, and there would be people that would come in with one of these accessories still on their hiking pole, but it would be completely smashed down. The carbide tip would be sticking out, and they would think that the tip was worn down or broken. So I just basically took it off and said, hey, buy a different accessory and you can put it on there if that's what you choose to use. There are places around the world that require a protective accessory piece to cover up that carbide because it's a historical site, for example, and they don't want you chipping away at the stones or whatever it is. Personally, I don't use them unless I know that all I'm going to be doing is walking on asphalt. But a thing about these tip accessories, as versatile as you may think they are, the reason I have like 3 of them sitting in my hands is because they become trail trash at some point. They fall off, right? And then now I find this stuff on a trail, just these rubber pieces. So I prefer not to use them unless it's required or I'm strictly going to be walking on asphalt. Anyway, take those accessory pieces off, and we're also going to take off the basket for this to make it a little bit easier to work with, because I want to retain the basket. Even though it looks pretty worn, I want to keep that basket. And I potentially will be using a heat gun on this. I don't want to damage the basket itself. So with that said, a couple of the tools that I use to remove hiking pole tips, and I'm sure I've said ski pole tips more than once, is a heat gun if necessary, channel locks if necessary, or just a towel, a hand towel, and that's mostly in conjunction with heat gun. So if I start heating up that plastic tip, it's going to be hot to the touch, so I'll just usually wrap my hands with this towel around so I don't burn them as I pull it off. You may consider using, depending on model, is a vise, which I'm not a huge fan of for putting ski poles or hiking poles in, especially if they're anything other than aluminum, because you're going to be cranking down. So better yet, have somebody actually work with you and hold it in place after you've heated it up to pull it off. That said, you may actually need to use a crescent wrench and a hammer so that you can hammer the tip off, so you can use like a resistance. And the reason I say that, and the reason I use a heat gun in general, is simply for the fact that many brands other than Lakey, so Lakey, as far as I know, on hiking poles does not use any sort of adhesive. But I've found that most of the Black Diamond hiking poles that I've replaced the tips on all have some sort of adhesive to keep the pole tip on. And that becomes challenging, especially if you have something other than aluminum. Aluminum's durable, right? You can pound on it, you can really wrench on it, you can bend it and bend it back. Anything other than that, though, can be delicate. You want to be careful about pulling and torquing on it, especially if it's, again, anything other than aluminum. Okay, so in the meantime here, we're going to go ahead and pull this basket off. And a lot of people don't realize, again, that these baskets even come off because it's kind of challenging. And the way with the Lakey poles is you have to use a lot of force to get to the couple of threads. There's only like 3 or 4 threads on these baskets, but you have to really pull it off. They don't just screw off easily. You have to get to the threads, and the threads on this one are so worn down that because it's old, that I was able to actually just pull it off the thread. But I'm using a generous amount of force here, pushing away from me with the pole and pulling toward me with the basket. And you see that comes off. The channel locks you can use, again, I don't plan on doing anything other than throwing this tip away, so I'm not worried about grinding this plastic down. I'm not concerned about damaging that. So I could just try with the channel locks to torque this thing off. Yeah, and it's coming off right away. Before I do that, I just want to make mention that if I was going to use a heat gun, because I knew there was some sort of adhesive that's holding this tip on there, or I didn't have any luck breaking that adhesive, or some reason I just couldn't get this off by hand, I would take this up and I would just don't want to burn it. You just want to heat it enough so that you can loosen up whatever plastic is going to expand a little bit. And if there is that adhesive in there, it should soften up enough that then you could go in with a cloth and yank it off by hand, or if necessary, using this channel locks and pull it off. But I was able to get that channel locks off, or use the channel locks to get that undone real easily, and voila. The old tip is off. This will go in the trash, but I will retain the basket that I was using with it. I'm just going to stick this back on there. And apply some pressure, and then I'm going to put the basket back on there. And just the opposite of pulling it off, you're going to have to use some force to get those threads engaged, and then at some point it's going to extend into this area where there's no thread, so it's going to kind of go past that, and then it'll be able to freely turn around, but it won't unthread. And again, if the threads went all the way up and all you did was righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, it would eventually work its way off the pole tip. So that's me just bypassing some of the threads in general. But eventually it will click into place and have that new pole tip on there with the threads. And again, I can rotate this basket all day long in either direction. It's not going to accidentally fall off because, again, it requires some force to pull it off. If you wanted to use some type of light adhesive on there because you're nervous that they were going to come off for some reason, I would say just use, like I do with a cross-country ski pole tip, a heat gun and a glue stick that you would use for arts and crafts. Just turn the heat gun on, wave that glue stick in front of the heat just soft enough that you can put a little bead in there, and then slide it on there, clear the excess glue off the edge. and you'd be fine. But honestly, I've never felt the need to do that because you're always pressuring down on the poles. Therefore, it's always sticking onto the shaft of that hiking pole. Essentially, that's replacing the hiking pole tips. I totally recommend taking inventory at least once in a while to see that those tips are still serviceable. And more than likely, you're going to notice that they are or are not because of their performance. Like I said, a little bit more challenging if you have a brand of hiking poles that uses an adhesive. Just again, be careful of damaging the poles if that's the case. Be very gentle with the heat gun, only as much as you need. You do not need to melt them off the ends of the hiking poles by any means. You just need it warm enough so that that plastic softens up and can come off. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out TahoeTrailGuide.com for more backcountry tips and skills and information about hiking and backpacking. If you have any questions or feedback, post it in the comment section below. And then I just want to say, as always, I really appreciate all of your support. Those of you who are Patreon subscribers, people who have sent me tips and gratuity via Venmo or PayPal. You guys are incredible. Thank you to all my subscribers here on YouTube, as well as those on TahoeTrailGuide.com, JaredMannanen.com. I just appreciate all of you guys supporting and offering great feedback. You guys are fun to have conversations with online. Thanks so much for everything. Take care, everyone.